People say the speed of light is the fastest thing there is. They say it the way they say nothing can go faster than sound in air, or that a car has a top speed. As if it's just a number, as if it's a practical inconvenience. That's already wrong. You think the speed of light is a limit in the same sense that a bad engine is a limit. You imagine that if we just had more fuel, better materials, stronger machines, we'd eventually punch through it. You imagine the universe saying, "Not fast enough," and slamming the door. Stop and think. That picture assumes something very specific. That speed is just speed. That motion is just motion. That space and time sit there politely in the background while things move around inside them. That assumption is the illusion. Let me start with something ordinary.
Speed is
you walk
not
across
just
the room.
speed.
You don't think about it. But something very precise is happening. You move one way through space, and at the same time you move one way through time. You never stop moving through time. Never. You might say, of course, time passes. That's not an explanation. That's a label. Here's the uncomfortable statement. You are always moving at a fixed speed. Always. Not through space alone, but through space and time together. You've never experienced standing still. What you call standing still just means all your motion is pointed into time instead of space. That should bother you a little. Now take a flashlight. You turn it on. Light leaves the bulb and moves away from you. You measure its speed, and you get the famous number everyone memorizes and nobody thinks about. Now you chase the light. That sounds ridiculous, but common sense says you should at least gain on it. If you run after a thrown ball, you see it moves slower relative to you. So why shouldn't light slow down if you move with it? But it doesn't. No matter how fast you go, you always measure light moving away from you at exactly the same speed. Not approximately, exactly. That's the crack in the story. This isn't a small correction. This isn't an engineering problem. This is the universe telling you that your idea of motion is wrong. People say, well, light is special. No, that's not an explanation. Light is not enforcing the rule. Light is exposing it. Here's the claim that collapses the comfortable picture. There is no such thing as going faster in the way you think there is. You imagine speed as something you add. 5 plus 5 makes 10. You imagine motion stacking neatly on top of motion. But the universe doesn't add speeds that way. When you try to move faster through space, something else gives. Not the engine, not the fuel. Time. Time slows down. Not in your imagination. Not as an illusion. Time itself changes, and space changes with it. That's not poetry. That's bookkeeping. The universe is balancing its accounts. You can push harder and harder, pour in more and more energy, and what happens is not that you get closer to breaking the limit. What happens is that the very meaning of distance and duration starts to shift under your feet. This is where people get uncomfortable, because if the speed of light were just a fast thing, then the universe would look familiar, mechanical, upgradable. But if the speed of light is built into the structure of space and time themselves, then faster than light isn't forbidden. It's meaningless. You don't fail to cross the limit. The limit is the shape of the game. And if that's true, then the real question isn't how fast you can go. The real question is what space and time actually are. So people ask, why can't we go faster than the speed of light? That sounds reasonable. It sounds curious. It sounds scientific. It isn't. You're asking the wrong question. Because hidden inside that question is an assumption you haven't examined. You're assuming that motion works the way it works in everyday life, and that the universe has simply imposed a restriction on top of it, like a speed limit sign on a highway. That's not what's happening. People give answers like, it would take infinite energy, or mass increases, or relativity forbids it. Those answers sound deep, but they're not explanations. That's not an explanation. That's a label. Saying infinite energy is just describing the symptom. It's like saying, you can't put your hand through the table because it's solid. Fine. But why is it solid? If you say, because atoms repel, now you're getting somewhere. If you say, because the universe says no, you're not. The real mistake is thinking the problem is about pushing harder, as if motion were a tug of war between your engine and some cosmic resistance. That's not how nature is organized. Let me reframe it. You're not asking why you can't outrun light. You're asking why space and time won't behave the way you expect them to. That's the real conflict. You imagine space as a stage and time as a clock on the wall. Things move across the stage while the clock ticks independently. Faster motion just means covering more stage per tick. But that picture is wrong from the ground up. Space and time are not separate bookkeeping systems. They're one thing. When you ask, why can't I go faster than light? What you're really asking is, why won't space and time stay fixed while I move faster through them? And the answer is, because they never were fixed. They adjust. Relativity does not say, light is special, so everything else must obey. It says, there exists a maximum rate at which cause and effect can propagate. Light just happens to travel at that rate. If light didn't exist, the limit would still be there. This is where intuition breaks. You think energy causes speed. In everyday life, that's true enough to be useful. But it's not fundamentally true. Energy changes how you move through space-time. It does not let you escape its structure. The closer you push toward that limiting speed, the more your motion tilts away from time and into space. And time pushes back. Not with a force. With geometry, this is the key. There is no rule saying, thou shalt not exceed light speed. There is no cosmic policeman. There is only a space-time structure in which faster than light is not a reachable state, the same way north of the North Pole is not a reachable place. You're still asking why when you should be asking how. How does motion rearrange time? How does space respond? How does the universe keep the bookkeeping consistent for every observer? Once you ask that question, the pieces start to lock together. And that's where things get truly strange. Let me show you how this actually works. Not with equations, not with symbols on a blackboard, with bookkeeping, because at bottom, physics is bookkeeping. Careful, merciless bookkeeping. You're always moving through space-time at a fixed total rate. Always. You can't turn that motion off. Think of it like this. Motion isn't something you have more or less of. It's something you distribute. If you're sitting quietly in a chair, doing nothing, you're still moving. All of your motion is pointed into time. You are rushing into the future as fast as the universe allows. Now you start walking. Some of that motion gets redirected. A little less goes into time. A little more goes into space. That's not philosophy. That's measurement. If you walk faster, time for you slows down just a bit compared to someone standing still. You don't notice it because the effect is tiny at everyday speed, but it's there. Now run faster. Still the same story. More motion into space, less into time. Here's the causal chain. Motion through space increases. That forces motion through time to decrease. Time dilation appears. A leads to B leads to C. Nothing mystical, just consistency. Now push this idea hard. You keep accelerating, faster, faster. Each time you do, space-time has to rebalance the books. Time slows further. Distances along your direction of motion shrink. Length contraction, not because space is being squeezed by some force, because distance and time are not independent quantities anymore. They are two sides of the same ledger. This is where people usually get lost. They say, time slows down because you're moving fast. No, that's not an explanation. That's a description. The real statement is this: there exists a maximum possible conversion rate between space and time. That's the speed of light. It's not a speed in the usual sense. It's a conversion factor. How much space equals how much time. And that conversion factor is the same for everyone. That's the miracle. And that's the trap. Because once that conversion factor is fixed, everything else is forced to adjust. If you try to move faster through space, space-time compensates by reducing how much time you get. If you try to measure distances while moving fast, those distances adjust so that everyone agrees on the speed of light. You don't get to cheat.
Rearrangement.
Now here's the part people really
itself.
misunderstand. They say it takes infinite energy to reach the speed of light. That's true, but it's not the reason. It's the consequence. As you accelerate something with mass, its resistance to acceleration increases, not because it's getting heavier in some old-fashioned sense, but because changing its motion requires changing how it moves through space-time. And space-time resists that rearrangement. Each push gives you less payoff. Each unit of energy produces a smaller increase in speed. As you get closer to that limiting rate, almost all of your motion is being redirected into space. There's almost nothing left to divert. At the limit, there would be no motion through time at all. Time would stop. That's not allowed because motion through time can't go negative. You can't go less than 0 time per time. So the universe doesn't block you with a wall. It asymptotically starves you. You can get closer, 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 but never there. Now consider light. Light doesn't struggle with this at all. Why? Because light has no mass. Mass is resistance to changes in motion through space-time. Light has none, so it doesn't get a choice. Light always moves at that conversion rate, always. It cannot slow down. It cannot speed up. It doesn't experience time passing because all of its motion is pointed into space. From the light's perspective, if that phrase even makes sense, emission and absorption happen at the same instant. 0 time. This isn't poetic. It's accounting. Now return to the original mistake. You thought the speed of light was a fast thing you might someday beat. But now you can see that beating it would require more than power. It would require rewriting the structure of space-time itself. And that structure is not optional. It's the mechanism underneath every measurement you've ever made. And once you see that, you start to realize something unsettling. The speed of light is not about light. It's about how reality keeps itself consistent. Now, let's scale this up. Because if the speed of light were only about moving objects, you might still hope it's a technical detail, something local, something you could ignore. You can't. The moment you accept that the speed of light is a conversion factor between space and time, you've accepted something much larger. You've accepted that it governs cause and effect. This is where intuition really breaks. In everyday life, causes come before effects. You flip a switch, then the light turns on. You push a cup, then it slides. You never ask how fast causality travels. You assume it's instant. That assumption is wrong. There is a maximum speed at which one event can influence another. That speed is the same number everyone memorizes for light. Not because light carries causality, but because nothing can carry causality faster. This is the real role of the speed of light. It's not the speed of photons, it's the speed of now spreading through the universe. Imagine 2 events. One happens here, one happens somewhere else. For the first event to affect the second, something has to connect them. Information, influence, cause. That connection cannot propagate faster than the speed of light. If it could, you would get contradictions. Effects before causes, signals arriving before they're sent. The universe does not tolerate that. So space-time is structured to prevent it. This is where people try to picture waves, particles, messengers flying through space. That picture fails. Nothing is traveling through space in the old sense. What's really happening is that space-time itself defines which events can be related and which cannot. There is a boundary. Physicists call it a light cone. Inside that cone, events can influence each other. Outside it, they can't. That boundary is not negotiable. And now you see the scale of the claim. The speed of light is not a property of objects. It's a property of space-time. It tells you which events can be connected at all. Now think about motion again. When you move faster and faster, you are not just changing your speed relative to other objects. You are changing how your presence slices through space-time. Different observers disagree about what events are simultaneous, not because of confusion. Because simultaneity is not absolute. That's another illusion that dies here. There is no universal now. Your now depends on how you're moving. That fact alone should convince you that the speed of light is not optional. If information could travel faster than light, you could send signals into your own past in some frames of reference. Not in science fiction. In bookkeeping, the equations would contradict themselves. So the universe enforces consistency by making the speed of light invariant. Every observer, no matter how they move, agrees on that one number. Everything else bends to preserve it. Lengths, times, simultaneity, all of them are negotiable. The speed of light is not. This is where people say, that's very strange. Yes, but strange compared to what? Compared to your everyday intuition, which evolved to deal with thrown rocks and walking speeds, not with space-time geometry. This is where intuition breaks, because it was never meant to work here. At small scales, this structure explains why particles behave the way they do. At large scales, it explains why stars, galaxies, and the universe itself have causal horizons. There are regions of the universe we can never influence, regions that can never influence us. Not because of distance alone, because of time. Even if the universe lasts forever, there are events forever out of causal reach. That fact is baked in by the same limit you meet when you try to outrun light. Micro or macro, it's the same rule. And notice something important. Nothing here required talking about engines. Or fuel, or technology. This has nothing to do with how clever you are. This is about how reality is stitched together. The speed of light is not a barrier you hit at the edge of performance. It's the seam in the fabric, and now the final discomfort. If this limit comes from the structure of space-time itself, then asking why is it that way is going to run you into a wall, not a physical wall, an explanatory one, because at some point, explanation ends, and that's where we have to stop pretending the universe owes us comfort. So now you ask the question you've been avoiding. Why is space-time structured this way? Why does there exist a maximum rate at which cause and effect can propagate? Why this number? And this is where I have to be honest with you. This is where the why stops. Not because we're lazy, not because we gave up, but because explanation, in the sense you're demanding, has reached bedrock. You're used to explanations that trade one mystery for a familiar picture. Why does a table hold you up? Because it's solid. Why is it solid? Because atoms repel. Why do atoms repel? Because of electromagnetic forces. So far, so good. But then you ask, why electromagnetism? And now you're stuck. You can describe it. You can calculate it. You can predict it to ridiculous precision. But you can't explain it in terms of something simpler, because there's nothing simpler. This is where people get frustrated. They feel cheated. They think physics promised a final reason that would make everything feel intuitive again. It never did. Physics does not explain the universe by comforting you. It explains the universe by telling you what it does and letting you test it. At the bottom, there is structure. Space-time has a geometry. That geometry contains a built-in conversion factor between space and time. That factor sets the maximum speed at which events can influence each other. We measure it, we use it, we test it, and it never fails. You want a deeper why. Any deeper why would be philosophy, not physics. That's not an insult, it's a boundary. And it's an important one, because once you accept that, something shifts. You stop asking for reasons that make you feel comfortable, and you start respecting what actually works. Understanding does not mean reducing everything to something familiar. Understanding means being able to predict what will happen next. By that standard, we understand the speed of light extremely well. We know exactly how clocks behave when they move fast. We know how lengths change. We know how particles respond to acceleration. We know where causal connections are allowed and where they aren't. And every experiment agrees. This is not a fragile idea. It's one of the most solid structures we have. So when you ask, why is the speed of light the limit? The honest answer is, because space-time is the way it is. That's not evasion. That's precision. You're mistaking description for failure. Let me say something that sounds almost disappointing. If the speed of light were different, the universe would still be self-consistent. Just different. Different chemistry. Different stars. Different possibilities. The number itself is not sacred. The structure is. And here's the part people miss. Once you know this structure, you don't need to outrun light to do extraordinary things. You don't need to break the limit to understand the universe. You already know the rules. You know how information flows. You know how time behaves. You know what is possible and what is not. That's real power. The fantasy is that deeper understanding will feel simpler. It won't. It will feel stranger. You started by thinking the speed of light was just a fast thing, a technological ceiling, an inconvenience. Now you see, it's the seam that holds cause and effect together, not a rule imposed on the universe, a property of its skeleton. And at the bottom, there's nothing underneath that. No hidden machinery, no final story, just structure that works. That's where physics ends, not with comfort, with honesty